Hello and welcome to Hops and Brews. This week,
We're talking about that sticky stuff that comes out of trees and then put it in your beer. Maple beers.
For an open window on a crappy world. Max and Chris from Ups and Brews. Ups and Brews. Welcome to Ups and Brews.
Alright, so this week we're doing maple in beer, which is a very Canadian thing to do. I don't think it's been done anywhere else, or if it has, I mean, you have to import the sap from Canada anyways. It's part of those things where you use the ingredients you have, and in Canada we have a lot of maple syrup.
Yeah.
And fun fact, I've also heard a lot of breweries going for birch syrup instead of maple, which is another kind of syrup.
Okay.
And I tasted a bit of it, like the actual syrup. It's actually really good. It's sweet, but it's not quite as sweet as maple. It's a lot more rare. I don't know why no one does a lot of birch syrup.
Maybe because it's harder to get, or no, I guess not.
But I feel like there's, maybe
It's the same process.
Well, we've been kind of like cultivating these maple trees for hundreds of years. And is there any birch forests in Canada?
Maybe.
There must be.
Maybe.
I mean, we have a lot of birch, so there must be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But speaking of that Canada only thing, I think that probably a little like up part of the U.S. also gets some maple syrup. I'm not sure am I right or wrong?
Sure. Vermont is huge in maple.
Yeah, just
It's a North American thing.
yeah. Okay, cool. Yeah, but we Canadian do prefer maple syrup over everything. It's our favorite source of sugar. And the reason why, I guess, if you don't know about maple syrup, which I'm going to explain it because we have roughly a third of our viewership that it's from Brazil, and you guys don't have maple syrup. Or if you, then it's probably very, very expensive. Maple syrup comes out of trees, yes. Every springtime when there's the snow melting, there's a switch in temperature, and the sap comes from the roots of the maple tree, then go up to get is it bourgeons? Like the little flowers that brings up the leaves. In French, it's bourgeon.
It's not that word. I forget the word now that you're looking for it.
But
yeah.
Yeah. So what we do, we simply do a little incision in the maple tree where the part of that maple sap just flows out of it. It looks like water, literally. You can drink it straight up from the bucket. It's a little bit sweet. We call it maple water. Have you already seen those water bottles filled with maple water, Max? Like at the grocery store?
They sell maple water?
Yeah, they do. I remember.
But my family had a maple farm, so I would go there every year and do the whole, help out, bring the buckets, fill the big thing. But it's funny because like with that water concept, in beer we do the exact same thing when we boil, where we concentrate that sugar, that sugar content.
Yeah.
With maple water, that's exactly how you go from that to maple syrup, is by concentrating the sugar in the liquid by boiling it.
Exactly, and that exact concentration level is bringing down 40 liters of maple water to 1 liter of maple syrup. It's not a very big win-win situation. There's a lot of hard work, boiling process going on. And it's quite impressive if you visit a sugar shack to see how it works. And even the bigger ones that have the whole automatic system that pumps out the trees. Like, it's crazy how technological this got. And maple is one very big export in Canada. And
it's so big that we have our own reserve. So if you go to, I think it's in Montreal or Quebec City, there is a maple syrup reserve. A little bit like the oil reserve, to try to keep the price of maple syrup equal. They overstock every year, and they only release a little bit so that if there's a better year, there's more, with a bigger yield, they have a little more product. If there's a worse year, they still have the same amount of product. They just use more of the reserve to try to balance that price off. It's kind kind of funny when you really think about it.
And it works
just
well.
Sugar.
It works very well because
yeah.
I think a couple of years ago we had a very bad year for maple syrup, and Japan is one of the countries that we do export a lot out there, and we nearly ran out of maple syrup.
Yeah, that's crazy. Oh, and also, if you do want to research even more and want to go down the rabbit hole, look up the maple syrup heist. There was a bunch of criminals who tried to steal a bunch of maple syrup. It's a pretty interesting story, I'd say.
Huh. Speaking of interesting stories, Max, how does maple syrup act in the brewing process if you want to brew a maple beer?
Honestly, if you want to brew a maple beer, don't expect a lot of maple flavors from adding maple syrup in your product. Because what's going to happen is that your yeast is going to eat most of that sugar. Maple is a very simple sugar. I believe it's in the 90% conversion rate, or even higher for your yeast. So you're going to end up with more of a higher percent beer than a maple flavored beer, which is kind of odd. There's a lot of different things. Same thing with honey. You know, you hear a lot of honey beers and mead and stuff like that, and you go, oh, it doesn't taste like honey. No, because most of the sugar is actually converted into alcohol and CO2, so you don't actually get a lot of those flavors survive that process. But if you do want maple flavors in your beer, you can use a fennel. Is that the word, Chris?
Yeah, it's a spice called fennel. It's an Italian spice. It's something I've looked up a little bit and also heard brewers using it because it actually has that... Don't use it too much because it's going to taste like Aunt Jemima crab syrup. But
yeah, it does end up tasting like fake maple in a lot of beers because they overdo it. And also, as soon as you know that maple syrup is highly fermentable, and then you taste a lot of maple in a beer, immediately you go, oh, okay, that's not maple syrup. Because the amount of maple syrup they would have to put in, it wouldn't taste like maple. Yeah, it'd be crazy. You'd have a 20% beer.
If you want to balance things out, like there's very good examples of maple syrup beers around. Max, you worked at Castle Brewery. Maple rye was a very good example. And the usage of rye really brought up more of that kind of like roasty flavors, aromas, because in maple syrup you find caramel, vanilla, wood, and like a lot of aromas that you can't really find in other sugars. So that's why it's kind of like an interesting inspiration for a beer. But again, like Max said, it's something that you tend to lose very fast. And on the cost perspective, as a brewer or just as a home brewer, maple syrup is expensive. You probably lose a lot of that sugar in the fermentation process.
Yeah, like Castle had an interesting approach to it, and I'm only going to talk about it because I know the process. I'm sure other people do it the same way. But they actually used 100% maple water. This is the water from the tree direct to brew the beer. So there was no addition of water. It was all tree sap, which is kind of interesting. It's kind of cool, and that's why you still had a lot of that sweetness and a lot of the mapleness. But they played very very well with the grains, like you said, rye, to try to get even more flavors in. So it ended up tasting more like a sortilège, you know, like something that has a whiskey taste as well as some sweet mapleness in it. Compared to if they use phenols, and they'd be completely different kind of deal.
Yeah, and when you compare both, like a beer brewed with maple syrup and maple sap, I do prefer maple sap because you do get a lot more subtle flavors. It kind of like, it's not prominent in maple, but it gets that nice kind of like background to it that feels a lot like maple. And I think it's not the proper way to use it, but a funner way to use it. Is that a good way to put it out, I think?
Well, I'd say that beer is 4 ingredients, and you play around with them to create anywhere from a stout to an IPA to a pale ale to a lager. And in the same way, if you want to add other ingredients, there's a million different ways to use those ingredients in your beer and to extract different flavors from it. So if you think of brewing with maple, definitely try a couple things out. You know, like put some maple chips in to see if you get any flavors from it. There's a lot of things you can do. A lot of fun to be had brewing beer.
Loaded with creativity.
So if you like this video, please leave a like, subscribe, and let us know in the comments below what you'd like to see for the next 101. I'm still peeved off about the whole party guile. No one wants to hear about it, so I guess we're not going to do it.
But, all right, we can close this
All
off.
right. See you guys on the next one.
Cheers.